Okay, so our final speaker will be Max Whitberg. I don't know that Max does anything where he needs an excuse for his behavior, so, but with that said, it might help me to understand his classmates and a lot of the things I see in the halls. So, after this, if you do a follow-up, I'd like you to be able to do one so you could share with my wife why the things I do are not my fault. But for now, we'll just find out why things are not the fault of teenagers and their teen brains. So, Max Whitberg, it's all yours.
It's not our fault. So what's the problem with teens? Most likely, many of us at one point or another have been criticized or insulted because of our behaviors and actions as a teen. How many can agree? So, I believe that many teens in this generation probably will or have already heard things like, teens are always on their phones. When they grow up, they won't know how to have a real conversation. Or, they'll never mature. They'll stay the same reckless and irresponsible teenager their entire lives. Well, in reality, it's not our fault. During our teen years, a lot of changes occur. This includes changes in our behaviors. These behaviors may seem to be in the teen's control, but a lot of the times they're not. Luckily, the changes for the better can carry on, but I sadly have to say the same for the bad changes. We all know we can't stay the same cute kid who seemed to be the perfect child our entire lives. We change. We become teens. Many people argue that this time in our lives is some of our hardest. Well, that just might be true. Teens are known for being rebellious, reckless, and sometimes completely odd. These behaviors and many others are a result of different factors like someone's inborn traits, their personal history, their family, their friends, and even in some cases, their culture. These behaviors aren't always ideal. Teens may start to make jokes about drugs, alcohol, tobacco, or even suicide. Teens also change socially. There are many different outlooks that teens have towards social situations, two of which are antisocial and asocial. Antisocial teens tend to have a more negative outlook on social interactions, while asocial teens have a more neutral outlook on social interactions. Antisocial teens may have a hard time connecting with their peers, and asocial teens just need to put in the effort. There are also some more dynamic behavior changes within teens, one of which is decision-making. Teens are faced with a lot of problems and questions in their teen years. These can be easy or difficult for the teen to answer. When a teen makes a bad decision, they tend to take a while or they don't notice at all that they made a bad decision. This could be dangerous. Say a teen decides to start smoking. By the time they realize that it was a bad choice, they could already have become addicted. Now they're hooked and they can't stop. Some other dynamic behavior changes include stress, which can be caused by the thought of moving on to college or choosing a career path, acting on impulse, also known as not thinking before you act. I'm a perfect example for that, but there's nothing to brag about there. Teens sometimes have a hard time understanding other people's body language or their emotions, and a lot of times teens are more prone into getting into fights or engaging in risky behaviors. So I'm going to ask you guys two questions. First one, how many of you have ever done something stupid because your friends told you to? Raise your hands. That's most of you. Second, how many of you have ever been asked this question? If your friends told you to jump off a bridge, what would you do? Raise your hands again. Once again, that's most of you. Now, I've been asked this question many times, and it got me thinking. Most people ask this question in a more rhetorical manner, but I started to think about it as an actual question. Would I jump? Would you? If not, what would it take you to jump? Would it be as simple as a friend daring you to jump off that bridge, or would you need all the money in the world? So keep that in mind further. We now know the behavior changes of a teen. What's going on inside their brain that's forcing these changes upon them? In everybody's brain, there are these areas filled with gray matter. Gray matter is the substance or the parts of the brain that consists of the majority of the brain's nerve bodies, or synapses. When you're anywhere from 0 to 18 months old, you get a rapid increase of these synapses. Recent studies show that during your teen years, you get another rapid increase of these synapses. As you can see on the chart, the 1 month to 9 month, there's a huge increase in these synapses. In the 2 year to adult, there's also an increase, but not as big. This is because the second increase is called the pruning phase. During the pruning phase, the brain literally prunes up the wrinkles and strengthens these connections, that's why they might look a little bigger. This is partly because of the changes in the teen's prefrontal cortex. Now, with the wrinkling brain, teens are more vulnerable. So earlier I asked if you would jump from the bridge. This may not be a realistic example because most people would think before jumping from the bridge, but it does reflect my point. Because of the changes in the teen's prefrontal cortex and having a vulnerable brain, having a wrinkled brain, they're more vulnerable to things that their friends may say. So in theory, it can be as simple as a friend daring you to jump off the bridge to get a teen to actually jump. So the prefrontal cortex is the largest part of your brain and is located right behind your forehead. The prefrontal cortex is very important. It weighs outcomes, forms judgments, and controls emotions. Most people's prefrontal cortexes don't fully develop until their mid-20s. So while adults are relying on fully matured brain parts, teens have to rely on a pruned up, wrinkled, and still developing brain for most of their activities. Aristotle, a famous philosopher from ancient Greece, once said that good habits formed at youth make all the difference. Aristotle said that the good habits you create when you're young can carry over to when you're an adult. I also believe this applies to bad habits. The bad habits you create when you're young will carry over as well. This is partly because a teen's brain is vulnerable. The vulnerable brain will adopt good and bad behaviors more easily, and maybe even easier for bad behaviors. Bad behaviors tend to have a bigger impact, so the bigger impact, the more likely they're going to stick. Aside from good and bad behaviors sticking, a vulnerable teen's brain also influences unusual behaviors or actions, one of which is privacy. Privacy is one of the biggest adopted behaviors of teens. I've seen and heard of kids my age keeping their grades secret from their parents, hiding in their rooms behind locked doors, not letting their parents read their texts, look at their social media accounts, all because they're scared. They're scared of the possible consequences. The parts of the teen brain that are involved in somebody's emotions and their emotional responses are still developing, and sometimes are even more active because of the vulnerable brain. A teen may usually be sympathetic, but because of these changes, they can be completely careless. Say they're completely careless, they can become extremely sympathetic. But no matter the change, the future is different for everyone. With this in mind, it's obvious that teens can't be blamed for all the bad they did. So I think it's safe to say that with all the evidence, it proves that this time in our lives could easily be the hardest. Our emotions are all over the place, our behaviors aren't what is expected in a so-called young adult, and in reality, we're not making every decision. Our brains are. So to end the 1,000-year-old question, what's the problem with teens? All I can say is, it's not our fault. Thank you.